Admiral Park activated the data tablet and began to show Commander Thesk the history of humanity. The images flowed across the screen in a relentless stream of triumph and tragedy. She showed him the pyramids of Egypt and the Great Wall of China. She showed him the Roman legions and the Mongol hordes and the armies of Alexander. She showed him plagues that killed millions and wars that killed millions. More, she showed him how humanity rebuilt after every disaster, stronger and more determined than before. 4,000 years, the Admiral said quietly. That is how long you gave us to prepare. Do you understand what that means? She showed him the Industrial Revolution and the World Wars. She showed him the atomic bomb and the space race and the moon landing. She showed him the secret programs and the hidden fleets and the weapons designed specifically to kill Vethkai. Every generation knew you were coming. Park continued. Parents told their children, who told their children, who told their children. We never forgot, we never forgave, and we never stopped preparing. Thesk stared at the images with growing horror. He had expected to find primitives with spears and arrows. Instead, he had found a species that had used 4 millennia to build an army capable of destroying his fleet in hours. The Vethkai had conquered 1,000 worlds, but they had never faced anything like this. They had never given their prey time to evolve into predators. You marked us for harvest, Park said, her voice like ice. You looked at our ancestors and saw nothing but future slaves. That was the worst mistake your empire ever made. She put the tablet away and stepped closer to Thesk. We captured 200 of your ships today. We destroyed 95 more. But we are going to let 5 ships escape. Do you know why? Thesk shook his head slowly, unable to speak. Because I want you to take a message back to your empire, Park explained. I want every Vethkai in the galaxy to know what happened here. I want them to know that Earth is no longer a harvest world. Earth is now a threat. She gestured to her Marines, who seized Thesk and forced him to his knees. But that is not the only message, the Admiral continued. You see, we know about your other harvest worlds. We know there are dozens of species out there, marked for slavery just like we were, waiting for the Vethkai to come and take everything from them. Park crouched down to look directly into Thesk's eyes. We are coming for them, she said. We are going to find every species you have marked for harvest. And we are going to tell them the truth. We are going to show them that the Vethkai can be defeated. We are going to give them weapons and technology and hope. And then we are going to watch your empire burn. She stood up and turned to her executive officer. Put him on one of the ships we are releasing. Make sure he has copies of everything we showed him. I want the Vethkai to see what is coming for them. Hours later, 5 battered Vethkai warships limped away from the solar system and engaged their faster-than-light drives. They carried fewer than 1,000 survivors from a fleet that had numbered almost 30,000, and they carried a warning that would shake the foundations of an empire on Earth. The people celebrated their victory without fully understanding what it meant. They knew that aliens had attacked and been defeated. They knew that their world was safe, but they did not yet know the full scope of what was about to happen. Admiral Park addressed the United Earth Council in a secure chamber beneath the Alps. The leaders of every nation sat before her, waiting to hear what came next. We have won the first battle, she told them, but the war has only just begun. The Vethkai will not accept this defeat. They will send more ships, larger fleets, more powerful weapons. We must be ready for them. She activated a holographic display showing the galaxy. Thousands of stars were marked in red, each one a world conquered or marked by the Vethkai. But we must also go on the offensive. Park continued. We captured 200 enemy ships today. Our engineers are already studying their faster-than-light drives. Within a year, we will be able to travel between stars. And when we can travel between stars, we will find the other harvest worlds." She pointed to the red markers scattered across the galaxy. Each of these worlds contains a species that the Vethkai have enslaved or marked for slavery. Some of them are technologically advanced. Some of them are primitive like we once were. All of them deserve to know that freedom is possible. The council members murmured among themselves. This was more than they had expected. They had prepared for defense, not expansion. I propose the formation of the Terran Alliance. Admiral Park announced a coalition of species united against Vethkai oppression. We will share our technology and our tactics. We will train their warriors and arm their ships. And together, we will tear down an empire that has stood for 10,000 years. The vote was unanimous. Humanity had spent 4,000 years preparing for invasion. Now they would spend the next century preparing for liberation 6 months later. The first human exploration fleet departed the solar system. Admiral Park stood on the bridge of the newly constructed flagship Sora's Legacy, named for the young woman who had started it all. The ship's hull bore the ancient symbol of the Watchers, a human hand crushing a Vethkai skull. Beside it was a new symbol, an open hand, reaching down to lift up a fallen figure. Humanity was no longer waiting for enemies to come. They were going out to find allies. Their first destination was a world on the edge of Vethkai space, marked for harvest in just 50 years. The natives were insectoid beings who had just developed basic radio communication. They had no idea that death was coming for them until human ships appeared in their sky and broadcast a message in every language. People of Nexar, we are humans from a world called Earth. The Vethkai marked you for harvest, just as they once marked us. But we survived, and we defeated them. And now we have come to help you do the same. You are not alone anymore. Humanity is here, and we will never let them take you. Across the galaxy, on 100 worlds, the story would repeat itself, ships bearing the flag of Earth appearing without warning, a flarning, offering technology and weapons and hope to species that had none, building an alliance that would eventually stretch across thousands of light years. The Vethkai had created an empire through fear and conquest. Humanity would create something greater through compassion and defiance, and it all began with a young woman who refused to let her people forget, who carved a warning into stone that echoed across 4,000 years, who taught her descendants that preparation was survival and that revenge was a dish best served after 40 centuries of careful planning. The Vethkai fleet passed the orbit of Jupiter. With weapons armed and shields at full power, Commander Thesk stood at the center of his bridge, watching the tactical display with growing unease. The human fleet had positioned itself throughout the inner solar system in a formation he did not recognize. His officers had analyzed their deployment and found it strategically bizarre. The humans seemed to be inviting the Vethkai to advance through gaps in their lines. It was either incompetent positioning or a deliberate trap. Thesk chose to believe it was incompetence. Vanguard squadrons advance through the asteroid belt. He ordered, destroy any resistance you encounter. 50 Vethkai warships surged ahead of the main fleet, eager to prove themselves in battle. They entered the asteroid belt at high speed, scanning for enemy vessels. The asteroids drifted silently through space, dead rocks of no strategic value, or so the Vethkai believed. The first weapons platform activated when the lead Vethkai ship passed within 10,000 kilometers. It was a small device, barely visible against the dark surface of the asteroid, but the beam it fired burned through Vethkai shields like they did not exist. The warship exploded in a flash of light and debris before the Vethkai could react. 1,000 more platforms activated. They had been hidden throughout the asteroid belt for decades, waiting for this exact moment. Each one targeted a different enemy vessel with weapons designed specifically to defeat Vethkai. Technology. The Vanguard squadron died in less than 30 seconds. 50 warships reduced to expanding clouds of metal and frozen atmosphere. Not a single human vessel had fired a shot. On the Eternal Conquest, Commander Thesk watched in horror as his tactical display filled with red markers. What happened? He demanded. Where did those weapons come from? His sensor officers scrambled to analyze the data. The weapons were hidden in the asteroids. Commander, we are detecting thousands more throughout the belt. And our shields did nothing against their beams. Thesk felt cold fear spreading through his body. This was not possible. Vethkai shields were the most advanced in the galaxy. No primitive species could develop weapons to penetrate them in just 4,000 cycles, unless they had help, unless they had studied Vethkai technology and found its weaknesses. The beacon. They had left a beacon on Earth, full of Vethkai systems and encrypted data. If the humans had captured it and decoded it and studied it for generations, they would know exactly how to kill. Vethkai ship's Admiral Park watched the destruction of the Vanguard from her flagship with grim satisfaction. Phase 1 complete, she announced. All fleet commanders, execute Phase 2. The human fleet moved with perfect coordination, closing the gaps in their formation. Vethkai ships that had been advancing through those gaps suddenly found themselves surrounded weapons. Platforms continued to fire from the asteroids while human warships attacked from all sides. The battle became slaughter. Vethkai commanders tried to organize their forces, but human electronic warfare systems jammed their communications. Ships that attempted to retreat found their escape routes blocked. Vessels that tried to surrender were ignored. The humans were not interested in prisoners. They were interested in revenge. Commander Thesk ordered his fleet to regroup around the flagship. 200 ships managed to form a defensive sphere, but they were taking losses every second. Human warships darted through their formation, firing weapons that no Vethkai ship could withstand. We must retreat. His executive officer urged, we cannot win this battle. We can return with a larger fleet and proper preparation. Thesk knew his officer was right, but retreat was almost unthinkable. The Vethkai Empire had never retreated from a primitive species. The shame would follow him for the rest of his life, but shame was better than death. All ships, emergency withdrawal. Thesk commanded. Set course for the edge of the system and prepare for faster-than-light jump. The surviving Vethkai vessels turned and fled. Abandoning their attack, human ships pursued them, destroying any vessel that fell behind. The retreat became a rout as Vethkai commanders abandoned formation to save themselves. Admiral Park watched the enemy fleet scatter and smiled coldly. Signal the pursuit squadrons, she ordered. Let most of them run, but I want the flagship captured intact. I have a message to deliver. Human warships surrounded the Eternal Conquest, cutting off its escape route. The flagship was the largest and slowest vessel in the Vethkai fleet, and it could not outrun its pursuer's commander. Thesk watched as his escorts were destroyed one by one until his ship stood alone. They are demanding our surrender. Commander, his communications officer reported. Thesk closed his eyes and felt 4,000 years of Vethkai supremacy crumbling around him. Lower our shields, he said quietly. Open the airlocks. We surrender. Human boarding shuttles attached to the Eternal Conquest. Within minutes, Marines in powered armor stormed through the corridors, securing the ship section by section. The Vethkai crew offered no resistance. They had seen what human weapons did to their ships. They had no desire to see what those weapons did to bodies. Admiral Park boarded the captured flagship personally, walking through corridors that had never known human footsteps. She was accompanied by her executive officer and a squad of elite Marines. They made their way to the bridge, where Commander Thesk waited with his surviving officers. The Vethkai commander was taller than any human, with scales that had turned gray with age. His yellow eyes watched the admiral approach with a mixture of fear and hatred. "I am Fleet Commander Thesk of the Vethkai Empire," he said in heavily accented human speech. "I demand to be treated according to the conventions of civilized warfare." Admiral Park stopped in front of him and looked up in his face without flinching. "You came to harvest us like animals," she replied. "You marked our world for slavery 4,000 years ago, and now you demand civilized treatment?" She pulled a data tablet from her belt and held it up for Thesk to see. "I have something to show you," she said. "I want you to understand exactly what you awakened, and then I want you to take a message back to your empire." Fleet Commander Thesk stood on the bridge of his flagship Eternal Conquest and reviewed the ancient survey data. The information was 4,000 cycles old, but that hardly mattered. Primitive species rarely advanced beyond basic agriculture in such a short time. Most remained exactly as they were found, waiting patiently to be harvested by their Vethkai masters. Earth had been classified as a Category 7 primitive world, the lowest possible rating. The dominant species were hairless mammals with soft skin and weak bodies. They lived in small settlements and used crude metal tools. They had no understanding of science or space, travel, or the greater galaxy. They were perfect slaves, intelligent enough to follow orders, weak enough to pose no threat. Thesk made a sound of satisfaction as he closed the data file. This would be an easy conquest, a quick victory to add to his already impressive record. 300 warships were far more than necessary, but the High Command believed in showing overwhelming force. It discouraged rebellion and demonstrated the futility of resistance. "Commander," his sensor officer called out, "we are detecting unusual energy signatures from the third planet." Thesk waved a clawed hand dismissively. "What kind of signatures?" "Electromagnetic radiation across multiple frequencies. There appear to be artificial satellites in orbit around the planet, and structures on the surface that suggest significant technological development." Thesk felt a flicker of surprise, but quickly suppressed it. Some primitive species did manage to develop basic technology. Over 4,000 cycles, it happened. Perhaps once in 100 harvest worlds, but basic technology was still basic technology. Their weapons would be chemical projectiles and crude explosives at best against Vethkai. Energy shields and plasma cannons. Such things were meaningless. "Continue approach." Thesk ordered broadcast the standard conquest declaration on all frequencies. "Inform the mammals that their world now belongs to the Vethkai Empire." The communications officer activated the broadcast systems and began transmitting. The message was the same one the Vethkai had used for 10,000 years. "Surrender immediately and serve the Empire as slaves. Resist and face complete annihilation. There was no third option on Earth." The message was received by billions of people simultaneously. Television broadcasts were interrupted, radio stations went silent, and the internet filled with the alien transmission. Panic spread across the globe as people realized they were not alone in the universe. Governments issued statements calling for calm while secretly activating emergency protocols. But in hidden command centers around the world, the Watchers smiled. They had waited so long for this moment. The public announcement came 30 minutes after the Vethkai transmission. The United Nations Secretary General appeared on every screen on Earth and delivered a speech that would be remembered forever. "Citizens of Earth, she said. You have just learned that we are not alone in the universe. What you do not know is that humanity has been preparing for this moment for 4,000 years. The creatures approaching our world came here once before. When we were young and weak, they marked us for harvest and expected to find us still helpless. They were wrong around the world. Hidden bases revealed themselves. Massive doors opened in mountainsides and vessels rose from underground hangars. In the asteroid belt and the moons of Jupiter, the true human fleet powered up its engines. Humanity had built 500 warships in secret, each one equipped with technology reverse-engineered from the Vethkai beacon. They had studied their enemy for generations and designed weapons specifically to defeat them, and now they were ready. Admiral Park Jian appeared on a secure channel to the Vethkai fleet. Her image was transmitted directly to every ship in the enemy formation. This is Admiral Park Jian of the United Earth Defense Force, she announced. Your conquest declaration has been received and rejected. Turn your fleet around and leave our solar system immediately. This is your only warning. If you continue your approach, we will destroy you on the bridge of the eternal conquest. Commander Thesk stared at the screen in disbelief. The creature speaking to him was clearly human, but she wore a military uniform and stood on what appeared to be a warship bridge behind her. He could see advanced displays and equipment that should not exist on a primitive world. Impossible, he whispered. His sensor officer looked up from his console with fear in his eyes. Commander, we are detecting a massive fleet emerging from concealment throughout the system. Over 500 vessels, each one comparable in size to our own warships. Their weapon signatures are unlike anything in our databases. Thesk felt something he had not experienced in 200 years of conquest. He felt doubt, but doubt was weakness. And weakness led to failure. The Vethkai had conquered 1,000 worlds and never lost a war. These mammals were bluffing. They had to be bluffing. Ignore their threats. Thesk commanded all ships. Increase speed to maximum. We will teach these creatures the price of defiance. The Vethkai fleet surged forward. Confident in their superiority, they had overwhelming numbers and centuries of combat experience. These humans might have developed some technology, but they could not match the might of the Empire. Admiral Park watched the enemy fleet accelerate on a tactical display. She had hoped they would take the warning seriously. She had hoped to avoid what was about to happen, but the Vethkai were too arrogant, too confident in their own power. They could not imagine that the weak creatures they had dismissed 4,000 years ago could pose any real threat, that arrogance would be there. Destruction. All fleet commanders, Park announced. The enemy has rejected our terms. Execute Battle Plan Alpha. Show them what 4,000 years of spite looks like across the solar system. Human warships moved into attack formation. Weapon systems powered up and targeting computers locked onto enemy vessels. The largest battle in human history was about to begin, and humanity intended to win. The sky burned orange and red as the sun set over the small village near the great river. Young Sora sat outside her family's mud brick home and watched the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. She loved this time of evening when the world grew quiet and the heavens revealed their mysteries. Her grandmother had taught her the names of many stars and told her stories about the gods who lived among them. But on this night, something was different. A new light appeared in the sky, brighter than any star Sora had ever seen. It moved across the heavens with purpose, growing larger with each passing moment. Sora stood up and called to her family, pointing at the strange light. Within moments, the entire village had gathered outside to watch the light split into many smaller lights, and a sound like distant thunder rolled across the land. The lights descended toward the earth, and Sora felt a cold fear grip her heart. These were not stars. These were not gods. Something terrible was coming. The massive vessels landed in the fields beyond the village, crushing crops and sending clouds of dust into the air. Each ship was larger than any structure humans had ever built, covered in strange metal that reflected the dying sunlight. Doors opened on the sides of the vessels, and figures emerged that made the villagers scream in terror. They were tall creatures with scaled skin the color of dried blood. Their eyes were yellow with black slits for pupils, and their mouths were filled with sharp teeth. They walked on two legs like humans, but moved with a predatory grace that spoke of ancient violence. The creatures carried weapons that hummed with strange energy, and they wore armor that seemed to shimmer and shift. Behind the soldiers came others who carried devices and tools that no human could understand. They spread out across the village, examining everything with cold, calculating interest. The leader of the creatures was larger than the others, with golden markings on his scales and a crest of bone rising from his skull. He walked through the village as if the humans did not exist, stopping occasionally to look at a tool or a piece of pottery. When he examined a bronze knife, he made a sound that might have been laughter. One of his subordinates approached and spoke in a language of hisses and clicks. The leader responded, gesturing at the terrified humans with obvious contempt. Sora did not understand their words, but she understood their meaning perfectly. These creatures saw humans as nothing. They saw them as insects, as animals, as prey. The creatures spent 3 days in the region, taking samples of soil and water and plants. They captured several humans and took them aboard their vessels for examination. Those humans were never seen again. On the third night, the leader summoned the village elders to stand before him. Through gestures and crude drawings, he communicated a simple message: we are the Vethkai. We rule 1,000 worlds. Your world is now marked for harvest. We will return when your kind has grown more numerous. Then we will take everything. The leader made a gesture, and his soldiers brought forth a large metal object shaped like a pyramid. They carried it to the center of the village and buried it deep in the earth. The pyramid hummed with energy, and strange lights flickered across its surface. This is our beacon, the leader seemed to say. When it calls, we will come, and then your kind will serve us or die. The Vethkai returned to their ships without another glance at the humans they had just condemned. The vessels rose into the sky with a roar that shook the earth, and within moments they were gone. The stars returned to their normal patterns, and silence fell over the village. But nothing would ever be the same. Sora stood alone in the field where the ships had landed, staring at the disturbed earth where the beacon was buried. She was only 15 years old, but in that moment she made a decision that would echo through 4,000 years of human history. She would not let her people forget. She would not let them be unprepared. The next morning, Sora began to carve. She found the largest flat stone she could move and began to record everything she had witnessed. She drew the ships and the creatures and the weapons they carried. She drew the beacon and marked the place where it was buried. She carved warnings in the simple picture language her people used, and she added symbols of her own invention. This stone would be the first, but it would not be the last. Over the following weeks, Sora traveled to other villages and told her story. Some people laughed at her and called her mad. Others listened with fear in their eyes and asked what they could do. Sora gave them all the same answer: remember, teach your children, pass the knowledge down through generations. Never forget that they are coming back. Sora found others who believed her, young men and women who had also witnessed the Vethkai arrival together. They formed a secret society dedicated to preserving the truth. They called themselves the Watchers, and they swore an oath that would be repeated by millions of humans over thousands of years. We watch the sky. We remember the enemy. We prepare for their return. We will be ready. The Watchers spread across the land, establishing hidden meeting places and creating new carved stones. They developed codes and symbols to identify each other across vast distances. They trained their children from birth to continue the mission, and they began to study if the HFY had weapons of great power. Then humans must learn to create weapons too, if the HFY had ships that flew between the stars. Then humans must learn to build such ships. The Watchers understood that this would take time. Perhaps more time than any human could imagine. But they also understood something that the HFY had not considered. Humans were patient. Humans were determined. Humans held grudges longer than mountains stood. Sora lived to be an old woman, respected and feared as a keeper of dangerous knowledge on her deathbed. She called her granddaughter to her side and pressed a small carved stone into her hands. The stone bore the symbol of the Watchers and a single image. A human hand crushing a HFY skull. They think we are nothing. Sora whispered with her final breaths. They think we will forget and grow weak and wait for slaughter like cattle. Show them how wrong they are. Show them what humans become when they have 4,000 years to prepare. Show them why they should have killed us all when they had the chance. Sora closed her eyes and died with a smile on her face, in the center of the village, buried deep in the earth. The HFY beacon continued its slow countdown. It would pulse and hum for 4 millennia, marking the time until harvest above it. The descendants of those first terrified villagers would build civilizations and tear them down and build them again. They would wage wars and make peace and split atoms and walk on the moon, and through it all, the Watchers would watch. They would remember. They would prepare deep in the cold void of space. The HFY recorded Earth in their archives as a primitive world of no concern. They would check on it in 4,000 cycles, expecting to find the same weak creatures they had left behind. They could not imagine what those creatures would become. They could not conceive of the fury that was building. Generation by generation, across 40 centuries of human history, they had given humanity a deadline, and humanity intended to make them regret it. The centuries passed like water through a river. Carrying civilizations along their endless current, empires rose and fell. Languages were born and died, and still the Watchers kept their vigil in ancient Egypt. They hid their knowledge in tombs that would not be opened for 3,000 years in China. They wove their warnings into silk tapestries that hung in the palaces of emperors. In Greece, they whispered their secrets to philosophers who wrote them down as myths about gods from the sky. The Watchers learned to adapt and survive when the Library of Alexandria burned. Scholars wept for the knowledge lost to the flames, but the Watchers smiled in secret, for they had removed the most important texts years before. The documents were carried across mountains and deserts to hidden vaults where they would wait in darkness. When Rome fell and Europe descended into chaos, the Watchers preserved their knowledge in monasteries. Monks who had never heard of the HFY copied ancient texts without understanding their true meaning generation after generation. The chain remained unbroken. The year was 1347 when the Black Death swept across Europe and killed millions of people. The Watchers saw their numbers reduced by half. But they did not break. They had faced worse in their long history. And they knew that worse was still coming by the time Christopher Columbus sailed across the Atlantic. Watcher cells existed on every continent. They had learned each other's languages and developed ways to communicate across vast distances. They shared knowledge of metals and weapons and mathematics. They were preparing. The Industrial Revolution brought new hope too. The Watchers, for the first time in their long history, they saw humanity developing technology that might one day match the HFY steam engines and factories and railroads transformed the world in a single century. The Watchers invested heavily in these new industries, building fortunes that would fund their preparations when the first airplane flew at Kitty Hawk. A watcher was there to watch and record when the first rockets launched toward space. Watchers were among the scientists who built them. They guided humanity toward the stars without ever revealing why. The year 1947 changed everything. A Kai Watcher excavation team had been searching for the beacon for decades. Using ancient maps and modern technology, they finally found it buried beneath what had become a farmer's field in the Middle East. The beacon was still active, still counting down, still waiting to summon the Vethkai. The Watcher scientists studied the device for months. Before they cracked its secrets, what they found made their blood run cold. The countdown would reach zero in less than 150 years. The Vethkai were coming, and humanity was nowhere near ready. The Watchers convened an emergency council, gathering leaders from every nation in secret. For the first time in 4,000 years, they revealed themselves to the governments of the world. They showed their evidence: the ancient stones, the preserved texts, the alien beacon still counting down. Some leaders laughed and called them mad. Others listened with growing horror. In the end, enough believed to change the course of human history. A decision was made that would define the next century and a half. Humanity would continue its normal development in public, but in secret, everything would change. Black budget programs were established in every major nation, funded by trillions of dollars. The brightest scientists and engineers were recruited and shown the truth. They were given one mission: prepare humanity for war. The public space program sent astronauts to the moon and built space stations for research. The secret program built shipyards on the dark side of the moon and weapons platforms among the asteroids. The public world developed computers and the internet and mobile phones. The secret world developed artificial intelligence and directed energy, weapons and shields that could stop nuclear explosions. Two versions of humanity evolved side by side, one living in ignorance and one preparing for annihilation by 2030. The secret fleet numbered 50 warships hidden throughout the solar system. By 2060, it numbered 200. By 2089, over 500 human vessels waited in the darkness between planets. The public world knew nothing of this hidden armada. They lived their lives and raised their children and argued about politics and sports. They had no idea that their entire civilization existed only because generations of Watchers had sacrificed everything to protect them. Admiral Park Jian stood on the bridge of the flagship Earth's Fury and watched the final preparations. She was the commander of the United Earth Defense Force, a position that did not officially exist. Her family had been Watchers for 800 years, passing down the sacred duty from parent to child. Now, at the age of 62, she would either save humanity or watch it die. Her executive officer, a tall man named Quan Tayan, approached with a data tablet. The beacon went silent 3 hours ago. He reported, "Our deep space sensors have detected the Vethkai fleet at the edge of the solar system. 300 warships, just as the ancient text predicted." Admiral Park nodded slowly and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, the creatures who had terrified her ancestors were approaching Earth. They expected to find primitive beings still living in mud huts and fighting with bronze knives. They were about to learn how wrong they were. "Signal all fleet commanders," the admiral ordered. "Execute protocol homecoming. The harvest is cancelled across the solar system." Hidden bases came alive with activity on the moons of Jupiter. Massive shipyard doors opened, and warships powered up their engines in the asteroid belt. Thousands of weapons platforms activated their targeting systems beneath the surface of Luna. Ground-based energy cannons rose into firing position. Humanity had waited 4,000 years for this moment. They had built an army in secret, while the rest of their species lived in blissful ignorance. They had studied the beacon and learned the Vethkai language and reverse engineered their technology, and they had improved upon it in ways the Vethkai could never imagine. Admiral Park thought of Sora, the young woman who had started it all with a simple carved stone. She thought of the countless watchers who had lived and died to make this moment possible. She thought of her own children, who would either live in a free galaxy or die as slaves. 4,000 years. She whispered to herself, they gave us 4,000 years to prepare. Now they will learn why that was the worst mistake they ever made. The beacon had summoned the Vethkai to their harvest, but instead of cattle waiting for slaughter, they would find wolves waiting to hunt, and humanity was very, very hungry.